Hi, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm very pleased to have with me as my guest Kurt Calia, who's a partner at Covington. Kurt, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Richard. Nice to be here.
Now, Kurt, you have one of the more unusual backgrounds I've come across. You have an undergraduate degree in biology, biochemistry, molecular biology. Tell me a little bit about why you chose that major and what career you were thinking about at the time.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed the study studying science. It was my favorite subject as a kid growing up. I think I was very much influenced by my parents. My father's he's retired now, but he was a medical professor for many years.
Mm.
My mother was a civil engineer and an architect, and had a variety of master's degrees in various scientific disciplines. And so, science was very much celebrated in my house growing up, and I was very taken by it from my earliest years. And so, when I went to college, I knew I wanted to focus on studying biology and biochemistry. And at the time, I was thinking about going to medical school. Like I said, my father's a medical professor. My older sister's a medical professor, and so that was very much the path that I was thinking about at the time. And then toward the end of my college career, I started to think about alternatives
Hmm.
and alternatives that would involve both keeping a hand in the study of science and other things I was interested in, including law, which you know um, was an interesting career choice at the time for sure.
Yeah,
But I loved science, and one of the things that's great about what I do now is I get to continue to study.
yeah, for sure. Well, what kind of what I don't want to say the word derail because that's not the right word, but what stopped the science study? Was there something that happened, a key thing that made you lose some interest in it, or?
No, it wasn't so much that I was uninterested in studying science, and I've often thought that if I hit the lottery and wanted to do something else for a career, I might consider going to medical school. I think if I were to mention that to my father, he would probably be rather upset that I didn't do that in the absence of winning the lottery. But um, for me, I had done a mock trial team in high school, and I really loved it. And
Mm.
I thought if there was a way I could combine the ability to stand up and advocate on behalf of someone, which I really enjoyed that experience, and my interest in science, it could be a really good combination. And at the time when I was in college and in my early days in law school, I had been thinking about perhaps pursuing environmental law.
Mm.
Environmental issues were something that were very important to me. I worked for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation growing up as a kid in Maryland. And I thought, wow, that'd be a great opportunity to combine my background in science, my interest in science, and the law. And then I worked one summer at the EPA in Washington, D.C. during an administration that was not known for its environmental track record. And that somewhat disabused me of the notion of pursuing environmental law. I spent a summer working on a project to try to figure out how to address Superfund site remediation on Native American reservations, which is a significant issue for a whole host of reasons, including environmental racism. And I spent the whole summer working on this project, and to have the person that was reviewing it to determine whether EPA policy was going to be adjusted on the basis of my work, read it, fanned the pages, and said, "Yeah, I'll never sell this on Capitol Hill," and literally put it in the trash can in front of me. So I thought at that point, maybe that wouldn't be the way to combine my interest in science and the law. And so I started thinking about other things to do.
Yeah, interesting. So when you started law school, when you made the decision to go to law school, you didn't actually really know what kind of lawyer you wanted to be. Is that right?
I was thinking about environmental law for sure, and I
Okay.
think that was one of the motivators.
Mhm.
But I didn't know much about the practice of law. We didn't, my parents' friends were generally either engineers or physicians, so
Yeah,
we
right.
didn't have a lot of we didn't have lawyers in the family or anything like that. So I didn't have a whole lot of folks to draw upon to really understand what the profession could be like.
Mm.
I did know that the law has extraordinarily broad applicability across a lot of different careers, and that also appealed to me as somebody who has been, I think, academically and intellectually pretty restless. The ability to pursue a career path and a professional educational path that would open up lots of different opportunities, was very appealing to me at the time.
Now, when you made the decision to go to law school, was it a hard decision in the sense that you only did that, or did you apply to medical schools and graduate schools to kind of hedge your bets?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And again, if my parents hear this podcast, they're gonna, this is gonna be triggering for them. But um, uh,
Because I
uh,
noticed you at least completed the major, so you finished all the coursework. I mean, it's not
yeah, I had
switched
fulfilled the
out and
pre-med
dropped out of
requirement.
biology.
Yeah, I had pretty much fulfilled the pre-med requirements. All I needed to do was study for and take the MCAT.
Mhm.
But I didn't. I focused on applying to law school, and that was really, my focus at the time. There was a period of time in the summer before my senior year in college where I think my father was um, a little disappointed by that decision, and so he spent some time lobbying and trying to get me to change my mind a little bit,
Mhm. Mhm.
for sure. But like I said, I once I had decided that that was something I wanted to pursue, I really wanted to give that its due and
Mhm.
really, throw myself into it, which I did. And
Yeah. Now,
I would say that the transition from studying molecular biology to law school was a
yeah.
little bumpy initially, for
Mhm.
sure,
Right.
because it was quite different from a lot of what I had studied in college. But ultimately, I worked it out, and
Yeah.
I enjoyed law school,
Yeah.
and have maintained some good relationships with some of my professors from that time.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to ask you. So when you got to law school, because yeah, it's very different from being a science major. I was an undergrad engineer, so I certainly know the feeling. But did it feel very right to you? Like, okay, I made a good decision, or did you have any thinking, maybe this isn't the right choice, or what did you think when you were
Yeah,
studying
I
it?
I definitely had some moments where I thought, "This is what I wanted. This was the choice." I definitely had some of those moments. I mean, I think every first-year law student probably has those moments,
Yeah.
even if they don't admit it at the time.
Yeah.
And I certainly think that, I had a few classmates that had, science backgrounds. I had a classmate in law school who was a practicing physician and decided he wanted to go in a different direction. I think he wanted to pursue the legal healthcare field, which he did. And so I suspect a number of us had some doubts in the early going, but sticking with it and ultimately finding an interest in intellectual property law, which is my focus and my practice now, ended up being a really terrific combination for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, tell me how you stumbled, or how did you find intellectual property law? It sounded like environmental was not good. How did this present itself?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate, and I've been fortunate really throughout my life, both grade school, college, and law school, of having some just terrific teachers and professors. And one of them in law school was a guy named Rob Merges, who's now a professor at UCal Berkeley,
Mhm.
very well known patent law professor.
Yes.
I had him for first year contracts, and
Mhm.
he's brilliant, and he was really intimidating, and it was a tough class, but it was one of those classes where I felt that every time I left the classroom, I had gained something from the experience. And so he was just starting out teaching patent law back in those days. In fact, he's got kind of the seminal case book on patent law, and he was writing that at the time where I was at Boston University Law School. In fact, I was among a number of students that were his guinea pigs for his first draft of that textbook back in the early 90s. And
Mhm.
so um, when I had the experience working at the EPA, and I started to think, okay, I'm going to need a law school plan B for something else I'd want to do. Knowing that Rob Merges was teaching patent law, I thought, well, I should just take a class with him, and I loved it. It
Mhm.
really satisfied my desire to both um, maintain and keep a hand in the study of science and understanding, how science can be used in a meaningful way to affect, clients. And it was just an incredibly interesting area of law that's been, shifting and changing, throughout my entire career. And so it really allowed me to experience the confluence of a number of different interests.
Yeah, for sure. So now fast forward through your career, do you get to use you do pretty much all life sciences kind of work? Tell me a little bit how that science background has played into your legal career.
Yeah, so it's a great question, Richard. Initially, most of my work was in the life sciences space, and I could draw upon my science background. Actually, I started in the early days of my career. I started at a small patent boutique
Mm,
in the Philadelphia area, and where I did patent prosecution. So,
mm, mm,
for those listening who may not know what that is, that's the drafting and filing of patent applications and the process of the back and forth with the patent office to try to get patents issued on behalf of clients. And I enjoyed that in the sense that by definition, it was all cutting edge science. And
right.
so I felt like it was somewhat similar to my academic experience studying science, but it wasn't the most interactive experience. I would sit in my office with a stack of scientific articles and I would write. And I enjoyed that, but I'm a bit of a talker, as you could probably tell. And so I wanted something that I felt was a little bit more interactive and something that would allow me to experience the showmanship of litigation,
Mhm.
and litigation, IP litigation ended up being the outlet for that.
I see. So then what, you launched a life sciences patent litigation practice, or did you end up
Yeah.
to other kinds of
So
technologies as well?
Yeah, so when I started at Covington as a grizzled second year associate, I was mostly doing life sciences IP litigation, mostly patent cases, and it was a pretty small practice at the time.
Mm.
It has since grown dramatically from, I was one of two associates at the time doing IP litigation. I think we now have 150 lawyers doing IP litigation or something
Yeah.
like that. So I've been at the firm and seeing that growth and that evolution. Initially, in part because Covington has such a strong life sciences practice, particularly on the regulatory side, back in those days. It was kind of the natural touch point for us to help serve our pharmaceutical clients on IP litigation matters. And so I did that pretty extensively for the first number of years. I also handled some cases, IP disputes for agricultural biotechnology companies.
Mhm.
In my studies, a lot of the work I did was on genetics. And so these were for genetically modified crops. And so a lot of the principles that were um, important in the resolution of those disputes, could draw upon my genetics background. And so initially it was very life sciences focused, but over time it shifted into other areas. And so, for example, in the last decade, I've probably done at least as much work in the aerospace and defense contracting world as I have in life sciences. And initially, I think stepping outside of my life sciences, bubble was a little daunting. But I really enjoy it. I mean, it really kind of affirmed for me that I just like the study of science.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though my focus in college was on molecular biology, I really enjoy learning about science in lots of different areas. And so one of the things that's been terrific for me is that the opportunities to do client work at Covington have spanned lots of different scientific disciplines.
Yeah.
And it's terrific. I mean, you get to really immerse yourself and become expert in this sort of very narrow, very focused area of science throughout the life of the case, and then you get to do it again when you work on something else.
Well, like in the aerospace industry, what kind of science are you studying? Like materials or aerodynamics, or what is the field of study you're
It's
actually?
run the gamut. I've certainly had cases that have drawn upon material science. So I've had cases related to, semiconductors or light emitting diodes, which are essentially semiconductors that are configured instead of performing calculations, they will emit light.
Mhm.
It's still magic to me how it works, but it's quite remarkable. I've had cases related to, um, gosh, I had a case a number of years ago related to what was at the time called RISC microprocessor core architecture. RISC stands for reduced instruction set computing, and these were small chips used in handheld devices from the late 90s, the early 2000s, so relatively primitive compared to what we have today. But by the end of that case, I could actually read Verilog code, which I
Wow,
thought was kind of cool.
that's
My
amazing.
then girlfriend, now wife, thought it was decidedly less cool when I would come home and talk about how I can now read this computer code. But that's just one example where at the beginning of the case, I would get these sort of reams of computer code, and it was absolutely indecipherable to me.
Wow.
By the end of the case, I was cross-examining the other side's technical expert on the same reams of computer code that I didn't understand a year and a half earlier. So I've really enjoyed that aspect of it, and by not being so narrowly focused in just life sciences or just one scientific discipline, I've had the opportunity to really experience and get to know and get to learn about lots of different industries, which has been a
Yeah,
great
yeah,
education.
yeah. Do you like that just as much, or is your heart still in a good, a good life sciences, biology, technology?
Yeah, I mean, I like the variety for sure.
Mm.
And if I go too long where I feel like it's just been too much life sciences or too much something else, I will purposefully, go out and pursue something that, it's been a little while since I've
Mm.
done. As an example, I had a trial I did about a year and a half ago or so, a pharmaceutical case, and I hadn't had a pharmaceutical case in a while, and so I had an opportunity to join a trial team for a very busy and very active matter, and got to have a significant role in trial. One of the experts I put on was a Nobel Prize winning chemist. That's always
Mm.
a thrill.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
for me, again, being able to have that variety in my practice has been incredibly rewarding.
So, what did your dad think about ultimately about your career that you were able to use such science? Do you think it was pretty cool? Was he happy about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think initially, even for my first few years out of law school, he kept saying things along the lines of, it's not too late to go to medical school. And then at one point, when I was probably, close to 30, um, I realized that he'd stopped saying that.
Mhm.
And I called him out on it. I said, hey, Dad, you're not mentioning medical school. He's like, well, you're too old for it now. So, but I think the other piece of it was he did learn about and did hear about some of my cases, and
Yeah.
some of the cases that I have been fortunate enough to work on at Covington have gotten some press, and so he'd read about them
Yeah.
occasionally too. And it did sound pretty interesting to him, and so I think over the years he has really grown to appreciate why I love what I do so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he actually a number of years ago, I'm trying to remember when it was. It was he retired unsuccessfully several times, so it was sometime between his first and third retirement, I think. He actually came and did a lecture at the firm about bioterrorism,
Oh,
and because there's some interesting legal issues that have come up, firm is handled in relation to that, and he's got some expertise related to that. So I think over time, I think he's really grown to appreciate
yeah. Yeah.
what I do and where I do it.
I assume you're the one that invited him.
Yeah, I was.
Well, you joked earlier. You said if you won the lottery, you might consider going to medical school. But in more seriousness, like, do you ever see maybe when you retire or later on, do you ever see yourself maybe doing something that might scratch that itch in any way, or what do you think?
I don't know. I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed doing at Covington over the years is I've spent a lot of time training and mentoring associates.
Hmm.
And I actually think that's something that if I get to the point where I'm ready to retire and not actively be handling litigation matters for firm clients, I think I could still add some value to the firm in doing that, and I could certainly see giving that some focused attention. I've also been very fortunate that at Covington, the firm has been very supportive of our pro bono clients and public service. And so, I've done a lot of that work over the years, and I certainly can imagine, spending some time in, quote unquote retirement working on pro bono matters as well. Medical school, I don't know. I'm almost 56, so that would be a little late to start that game, I think, at this point. But I do think that there are ways that if I hit the lottery, I
Yeah,
suppose,
yeah,
or
yeah.
or in retirement, that I can still add value and still keep a hand in helping the next generation of lawyers at Covington handle intellectual property matters.
Well, Kurt, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your taking the time. I loved hearing your story about how you went from biology to law, and I really appreciate you telling me about it.
Absolutely, Richard. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
This is Richard Hsu and Kurt Calia. Thanks.
Thank you.